Can everyone hear me? Hear me at the back? Yes, yes, yes. All right, if you can hear me, put your finger on your nose. They're good, they're good. All right, my name is Nelson, and today we're going to talk about how would Elon Musk build an L&D strategy. But before that, we're going to play a little game. Put your hand up if you've played bingo before. Wow, we got a lot of bingo players. All right, we're going to play a game of birthday bingo. I'm going to call out a number. If you were born on that date, put your hand up. So if you're born on the 27th, okay, 16th, 9th. Wow. One more, 3rd. All right, a couple of people. All right. Here's why we play bingo, because L&D in a lot of organizations right now is much like playing a game of bingo. Here's why. It starts off with some senior stakeholder in the business coming over and saying, I think we need a course for X. L&D go away, and we spend the next 6 months building the most beautiful course with workbooks, animations, all kinds of gimmicks and buzzwords. It's gone through so many rounds of revisions. We've all convinced ourselves that this must be the best course in the world. 6 months after, we finally, at a time that we've decided to, we push it out to the organization. And that's a bit like when I called out a number. And at that point, sometimes it aligns, and that course solves a problem for someone. And that's the 1 or 2 people who put their hand up. But most of the time, the numbers don't match. And the course doesn't. It isn't relevant. It doesn't solve a problem. And every time those numbers don't match, you're wasting time, resources, and energy. So what you find is a lot of organizations are playing L&D bingo and losing very badly. Now, how many? So every time the numbers don't match, you don't get engagement. And this is what we call engagement gap. And engagement is the primary requirement for any learning to take place. It's not the only requirement, it's the primary requirement. For any kind of behavior change and performance improvement and real impact to take place, people must engage with your learning first. If they're not engaging, nothing else can follow. However, in 2020, L&D globally spent more than the equivalent of 160 countries worth of GDP on training. Yet in the same year, they found 75% of employees were dissatisfied with their company's L&D. Only 12% reported applying the skills they got from their L&D that they did, and 60% of employees wouldn't recommend their organization's L&D function. So what that tells you is a lot of people spending money on L&D bingo, and again, losing very badly. So why is this happening? Why are so many people getting it wrong and losing at L&D bingo? Now, the mistake L&D teams make is year after year, they think it's content. So they think if we made the content more fun and interactive, people will start to engage more. But the problem isn't the content. It happens much, much before, at the point where you're developing your L&D strategy. If you're designing and developing your strategy to solve the wrong business challenge, if you're designing and developing your strategy for the wrong people, if you're measuring the wrong metrics, it was wrong to start off with. It wasn't the content. So how do you right these wrongs and make sure you're winning every time you play L&D bingo? This is where we can use first principle thinking. Put your hand up if you're familiar with the idea of first principle thinking. Great, I'm glad it's not most of you, otherwise this will be a waste of time. So first principle thinking is when you take a problem and you boil it down to its most fundamental basic truths. So you strip away all of the assumptions and you boil it down to what do we absolutely know is true. Now, Elon Musk is famously known for practicing first principle thinking. I'll tell you a little story. So when Elon Musk was starting SpaceX, he was looking to buy a rocket, as you do. And once he was shopping around for a rocket, he found out that rockets are actually quite expensive. They cost in the north of about 60 million. Now that's even expensive for a billionaire. And when he asked around, everyone told him, well, Elon, of course, rockets are always going to be expensive and there's nothing you could do about this. But Elon Musk, practicing first principle thinking, he took this problem and broke it down to its fundamental basic truths. So he asked the question of, what is a rocket made out of? So he said, there's a bit of copper, there's a bit of titanium. Don't worry, I'm not going to list every single material that goes into a rocket. But once he realized what these materials were, he found these materials for 1/10 of the cost on the commodities market. And so he bought the material on the commodities market, built his own rocket for a fraction of the cost, and now has a reusable rocket. That's what happens when you apply first principle thinking to a problem. Now, what you commonly find in L&D teams is the opposite of that, and that's called reasoning by analogy. We do this on a day-to-day basis. It's when you decide to do something because others have done it that way. So let's buy this content library because everyone else seems to be buying this. Let's buy this LMS because that's what everyone seems to be doing. We reason by analogy without ever boiling it down to the fundamental truths and asking, what is the problem and what are the building blocks of that problem? So what we're going to do today is apply first principle thinking to building an L&D strategy. In essence, how would Elon Musk build an L&D strategy, and how do we win at L&D bingo every time we play? So are you ready to find out how to win an L&D bingo? We're ready. Now before that, I'm going to tell you who I am, right? So my name is Nelson. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called HowNow, just behind you there. We're a learning experience platform that works with everything from your fast-growing companies like Gymshark, Depop, Checkout.com, all the way to your global enterprises like Investec, Sanofi, Telenor, just to name a few. And we help them onboard, upskill, and enable their people. I'm also the author of a book called Learning at Speed, which essentially takes all the lessons and mental models and frameworks of my background in entrepreneurship over the last 15 years and applies it specifically to L&D. So what are the things we can borrow from there and apply to L&D to change the way we're approaching organizational learning? I'm also the host of a podcast series called L&D Disrupt. Check it out, where we bring in L&D disruptors, we pick their brain and find out how to navigate the world of L&D. That's enough about me. Let's find out how to apply first principle thinking. Now, the first thing you do is we need to break down the L&D strategy into those first principles. So what are the fundamental building blocks of an L&D strategy? So we've came down to 9 building blocks. Problem, solution, key resources, customer, key metrics, value proposition, partner stakeholders, cost and outcome, and I'll go through each one of them shortly. Now, the combination of these 9 building blocks will give you the why, how, and what of your L&D strategy. Now, to put first principle thinking into practice, I developed the learning canvas, so we can put the first principle thinking into practice in a visual way that's easy to communicate with the rest of the business and easy to collaborate on. So I recommend you start with the first 3 blocks: problem, customer, value proposition. The combination of these 3 blocks give you the why. Now, the why is the thing that drives your L&D strategy. The why is the reason why your business gives you budget. The why is the reason why an employee will invest their time and energy in engaging with your L&D strategy. The why is the reason why you get out of bed to do this in the first place. Now, typically what you find is the L&D strategy typically starts with the customer. I recommend starting with the problem. Because what the business is interested in, what the individual is interested in, is solving a business challenge. And so we start with the problem. Now, when you talk about the problem, a great way to frame the problem is using the concept of jobs to be done. How many people are familiar with the idea of jobs to be done? All right, still only a few people. So jobs to be done is essentially the idea that when we buy a product, we're essentially hiring that product to do a job for us, right? So say, for example, the job to be done was to speak to a customer. I could either hire Zoom to do that, or I could hire an airline to fly me there so I can speak to that customer. 2 very different products that help me get the same job done. So a great way to think about learning is, what's the job to be done that they're hiring learning for? Because learning is not, it's the solution that they're hiring to get that job to be done. And a great way to frame the job to be done is using what we call job stories. So this was actually developed by the very smart people at a company called Intercom to frame the job to be done. And it's made up of 3 parts. When blank, I want to blank so I can. Now, this simple statement The first part captures the moment of need. Now, the moment of need is very important because that's what motivates the employee to engage in the first place. It's in that moment of need you design your strategy for that context. What is the motivation? What are they trying to achieve that they can't achieve, that they need learning to help them do? And the final part is the desired outcome. Why are they motivated to do this in the first place? What's the outcome they will achieve by doing that? With this simple statement, you can frame the problem that you're trying to solve with your L&D strategy. So here are a few examples. When I have one-to-ones with my team members, I want to have better career development conversations so I can retain our best talent. When I have a qualified sales opportunity, I want to know how to manage the rest of the sales process so I can win the deal and hit my quarterly sales target. When I'm completing an RFP, I want to know all of the up-to-date product and company information so I can complete it to a high standard quickly. This frames everything you need to know about the problem. Now we go to the customer. Now I want you to imagine we're all collectively running a high-protein cereal bar company. Now we have two options. We can either market to everyone who has breakfast, or we can market to everyone who goes to the gym in the morning, doesn't have enough time to have breakfast just before they go into work. Which one do you think converts more? The latter, right? The latter uses data to build a better picture of who that customer is. And right now, what we're doing within organizational L&D is we're targeting based on everyone who eats breakfast. What we need to do is to leverage other company data. To give you a few examples, skills data. So our customers use HowNow to measure what skills they have and don't have in their organization, and they can measure what level of proficiency they have for each of those skills. They can use that data to segment their target audience. So they can push out content that says, anyone who's got less than a level 3 in leadership, that's my target audience, and that's who I want to target. What you can also do is use behavioral data. For example, imagine you're trying to tackle burnout in your organization. Rather than pushing out learning resources to everyone, you can use data around who's messaging out of hours on Slack, or sending out emails out of hours, and use that data to segment your target audience and target people who would best benefit from resources around burnout. So the idea is to work with stakeholders across your organization. For example, performance data. If you're trying to help the sales team, work with the sales stakeholders to understand performance KPIs that they're measuring to segment data. For example, if I want to tackle underperforming sales reps, I would use their sales performance data to segment that target audience. The last one in the first trio is value proposition. So the value proposition, it's the what's in it for me. It's the end business and individual benefit of this L&D strategy. The value proposition is what informs all of your marketing and comms. This is the value you're adding with this L&D strategy. This is why the business is giving you a budget. This is why employees are giving you their time. And so you define this not only for the business, you also define this for the employee. So let's complete our canvas. The problem is when they speak to prospects, they want to be knowledgeable about the product so they can sell the product better. Who is the target customer? Sales reps that have a low product knowledge and sales conversion rate. What's the value proposition for the employee? They improve their sales conversion rate and win more deals. What's the value prop for the business? They improve sales efficiency and hit revenue goals faster. Now we move on to the how. The how is made up of solution, stakeholders and partners, and key resources. Now you might be thinking, the solution is your course or training program. It isn't. The solution is the mindset, the knowledge, the skills that they need to be able to solve that business challenge. Your courses, your training programs, your learning resources are all ways in which that solution manifests itself. So the solution is where you define what's the mindset. Now mindset is what shapes our behavior. A great example of this is when Satya Nadella joined Microsoft as their CEO. Prior to that, Microsoft was starting to stagnate. Every product they launched wasn't landing. The market share was starting to stagnate. They were losing out to competition. When Satya Nadella joined, the first thing he realized was there was a fixed mindset in the organization. They were scared to experiment and try things because they were Microsoft, and they were scared to get things wrong. So the first thing Satya Nadella did was implement growth mindset across the business in various different ways. So people are willing to experiment, try new things, get things wrong, and learn from those mistakes, and the rest is history. Then we look at knowledge. So knowledge is, what are the facts, the concepts, and frameworks that I need to know? And skills is how you apply those facts, knowledge, and information that I gather within a relevant context. So this is where you define those. Then you define who are the partners and stakeholders who can help you create that solution. So you look across the business, who are the stakeholders who are most motivated to realize this solution? You get in touch, you get them involved. This is where you define who are the people who can help you realize this solution. Then we come to key resources. Now, I want to ask you a question. I want you to think about the last time you learned something that had a big impact on your career and performance. Now put your hand up if that learning took place inside an LMS. That's amazing. An audience full of L&D people who probably have an LMS in their budget, yet one person put their hand up. Put your hand up if it was a blog, a webinar, a book, from a colleague, podcasts. All of those things don't exist in your LMS. Yet most of our budget goes on LMS and e-learning SCORM courses. Why? The learning ecosystem is far more diverse and vast. And we just spoke about a few of the items. Now, what we need to be able to do is bring all of this together. Now, the reality is two things. One is people are learning outside of the LMS, and most of the time that's what they're doing. And the second thing is learning is happening with or without L&D. Now, this is not the moment where you go, maybe I need to change my career. No. This is when you realize, actually, it's more important than ever for L&D to play a role. Now, this is where, if you think about the conductor of an orchestra, what does a conductor do? It's the most visible job in the world, yet most people are like, what the hell is this person doing? Can't the musicians play without a conductor? Of course they can. But what the conductor does is make sure people are playing in alignment, in harmony. And that's what L&D do. They play a critical role in bringing this learning ecosystem together and making it available to the end user. Now let's bring it together. So what's the solution for this problem? Product demo, they need to know about security requirements, they need to know about the benefit of features, presentation skills, they need to have the confidence of a product expert. Who can help me execute this? The head of sales, the product marketing team. What are the key resources? We need a learning platform, so let's get HowNow, product videos, template responses. We need a call coaching software, pitch postmortems. So now we've defined how we're going to solve this problem. Now the last trio is the what. How do we know if we're delivering the value? That's made up of key metrics, outcome, and costs. Now key metrics. Now often this key metric here is where L&D teams typically stop. They measure enrollment, views, completion rate. Now, none of these metrics are your outcome. They are all leading indicators of engagement. You measure them to see whether people are engaging. You're not measuring them to see if you're having impact. They don't tell you whether you're having impact. This is, you put something out there, are people starting to engage with it? Do they find it relevant? So, for example, reviews is a great way of getting early validation. Did they find this useful? You don't know whether it had an impact on performance improvement or behavior change, but you can start to get a feedback around whether they found it useful in the first place. You can do proof of knowledge. Now, a lot of L&D professionals do this. This is like quizzes, assessments, to assess whether people have understood the material that they've acquired. Proof of skill. A great way of implementing this is like a mini 360. You can use a platform like HowNow, or you can do it manually. Just do a mini 360 where I do a self-assessment out of 5 on a particular skill. I then invite my colleagues and my managers to also give me an assessment out of 5. That mini 360 gives me a numerical value for tracking my skills proficiency, which makes it easy for you to track whether the learning you're doing is starting to have an impact on skills or not. How many people are sharing it? Sharing is a great way of measuring, because if I found it useful, I would share it. If I didn't find it useful, I wouldn't. So it's a great leading indicator to measure whether people are engaging with what you're offering. Then we come to outcome. Outcome is how you measure whether you delivered your value proposition, right? This is how you're measuring the impact you're having on the business. There's two things your outcome needs to be. It needs to be A, measurable, and B, it needs to be aligned to the business and individual. And I often get the question, but how? This is one of the hardest things L&D professionals struggle with, is measuring outcome and impact. Now there's two ways. You triangulate the data using quantitative and qualitative data. The quantitative data, for example, if I'm trying to improve our sales conversion rate, I would get the baseline metric. So our baseline metric is the conversion rate right now is 10%. The goal is to get to 20%. So as we implement our L&D strategy, I can start to see whether that metric is moving or not. Now you might ask me, well, Nelson, if the metric does move, it's not all about L&D, is it? You're right, it's not all about L&D. And that doesn't matter. It's not about exclusively L&D having the influence. What you then do is you have qualitative interviews and conversations with the beneficiaries of your strategy. And you ask them, did this learning resource or experience influence your performance? If they say yes, that is enough. The combination of qualitative and quantitative gives you the data you need to build an impact narrative that helps you build that narrative to say this strategy did influence and impact the business. And the last one is ROI. Now this is a one that I've seen L&D professionals struggle with. But as far as the canvas is concerned, it's very simple. You basically minus the outcome block from the cost block. And the cost is the final block. The cost is, what is the cost of implementing this L&D strategy? Are you bringing in external contractors? Are you curating content that you need to pay for? Is it costing you time to build content? That's the cost you're taking into account. And the outcome minus cost builds your ROI narrative. If that turns out where your outcome is smaller than your cost, then you're not giving return to the business. So let's put that back into the canvas. So we have our key metrics, which is views of templates, responses, FAQs. How many people are attending the pitch post-mortem that we're running after every time they do a pitch? What's the outcome we're measuring? Is the sales conversion rate. We've got the baseline metric, and we're measuring where it's going to. And what's the cost? Well, we need to pay for the license fee for a call coaching software. Maybe we need to pay for the license fee for a learning platform. These are the costs that go in. That box minus this box, that's our ROI. So that's how we bring together the fundamental building blocks of an L&D strategy. Now, what I'd recommend is when you try this out in your organization, is get your L&D team around. Get the relevant stakeholders around. It's an easy enough single-page document to throw up on the board or do on a digital whiteboard and collaborate, discuss, challenge. And it's an easy enough one once you filled it up to share with the rest of the business. Now, one thing I want to highlight is these things are still assumptions. And so what you need to be able to do is test, learn, and iterate. You might implement a learning resource and realize it's actually not moving the needle, or you're not getting the engagement that you need. That's fine. Then you go back to this and you start to optimize each block. Maybe we're solving the wrong problem. Maybe our solution, maybe we've got the skills and the mindset and the knowledge wrong. Maybe we're targeting the wrong customer. Maybe we haven't got the right stakeholders who are helping us develop this L&D strategy. So you keep going back to this, optimize, iterate, or pivot on each block in the canvas. So you can scan this QR code and get your own version of the learning canvas. Use it. More than happy for you to reach out to me and connect and to answer any questions that you have. But often the question I get is, how do I introduce this to my business? Well, what I always recommend is start small, think big. Start with one little project. Get your team on board and gather the data. So scan it and try it out. We're right behind you there on stand 27, so come and speak to my colleagues. This is one of the things we cover in my book, Learning at Speed. We've got a few limited copies at the stand, so do come over if you want a copy and find out a bit more about HowNow. But thank you very much for your time, and if you've got any questions, let me know. Questions? Yeah, we got time for a few questions, if anyone's got questions. 5 minutes for question? Any questions? No? Good. Is that a good thing, bad thing? It's a good thing. We're stunned to shock. We're still thinking, what the hell just happened? No? If not, you can use the rest of the few minutes to reflect, and I'll leave you to it. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.